Tonight we slip into the deep, humid embrace of a West African forest, long before the map was drawn with the names we know today. The air you breathe is thick, a warm syrup of damp earth, blooming frangipani, and the distant, smoky scent of a village hearth. Your feet, bare or perhaps shielded by simple sandals, sink into a carpet of moss and decaying leaves, each step a near-silent press against the ancient soil. The canopy above is a tangled roof, a lattice of green so dense it tones the midday sun into a watery, dappled gold. Strange, melodic calls of hidden birds and the relentless, vibrating hum of insects are the only music here. This isn't a place for the unprepared. A single misstep, a careless brush against the wrong vine, or a drink from a deceptive stream, and you probably won't survive this journey to see the artistry we've come for. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You aren't here merely for a walk, a tourist on a scenic trail. You are here because beneath your feet, tangled in the very roots of these massive, silk cotton trees, lies the heartbeat of an empire. Gold. To the Akan people, who have carved their civilization from this demanding land, it is Sika, a word that means not just the metal itself, but wealth, power, and the very essence of the sublime. It is the sweat of the earth, the tears of the gods, a spiritual and physical force that dictates the rhythm of life from the humblest village to the court of the Asante, the king of the Ashanti. You feel its pull, a literal gravity, drawing you deeper into the woods, away from the footpaths and towards the secret, sacred places where the earth yields its treasure. This is where the story of the Goldweight begins, not with a chisel or a furnace, but with the back-breaking, perilous work of the miner. You follow the sound of muffled voices and the dull thud of tools to a clearing, or more accurately, a wound in the forest floor. A narrow, precarious shaft, shored up with lashed timber, drops away into a profound darkness that smells of cold clay and deep time. Men, their bodies sheened in sweat and dust, haul leather buckets of earth and rock to the surface, their muscles cording with the strain. The risk is constant. A collapse of the shaft, a misswing of a pick, the slow, suffocating lung disease from the fine, glittering dust. This glittering substance demands a tribute of human sacrifice. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Ashanti Kingdom's immense wealth and power, which would later astonish and tempt European nations, was fundamentally rooted in these clandestine, grueling mining operations that stretched across the forest zone. The raw ore, once hauled into the light, doesn't look like much. It's a dull, rocky conglomerate, flecked with promise. It's taken to a nearby stream, where another group of workers, often women, begins the tedious process of panning. You crouch by the water, watching as they swirl the sediment in wide, shallow bowls, washing away the lighter earth with a practiced, sloshing rhythm. The water swirls, brown and cloudy, and then you see it, a flash of unmistakable, brilliant yellow catching the filtered light. A tiny nugget, no larger than a pea, is plucked from the slurry. It feels heavy for its size, unnaturally dense, a little piece of captured sunlight in the palm of a hand. This is the raw material of kings, the seed from which empires and art will grow. As you leave the stream, your own clothes now damp with the mist of the water, some elders whispered that the most potent gold, the kind with the strongest sun or soul, was found not in the deep mines, but in the nests of certain termites. The theory went that as these industrious insects tunneled deep into the gold-bearing soil, they would bring minuscule particles to the surface, creating a concentrated, naturally refined deposit. Imagine that, the foundation of a kingdom's wealth, allegedly curated by bugs. It's a charming, almost mythical notion that underscores how deeply intertwined the quest for gold was with the natural world, a world seen as alive with spirit and possibility. As you move away from the mining site, the heavy, metallic scent of the earth gives way once more to the living perfume of the forest. You carry with you the weight of that single, small nugget, a tangible piece of the mystery. You've seen its origin, felt the danger of its extraction, and understood its initial, raw value. But this is only the very beginning. This raw seeker is about to undergo a transformation, a journey into the hands of artisans who will not just shape it, but give it meaning, purpose, and a voice. Historians still argue whether the initial drive for this intricate artistic tradition was purely economic, a simple need to standardize trade, or if it was, from the very start, an expression of a deep-seated philosophical need to clothe every aspect of life, even commerce, in beauty and proverbial wisdom. The answer, like the gold itself, is probably buried deep, waiting to be brought into the light. The forest's oppressive humidity begins to recede as you approach the outskirts of a village, the air now thickening with a different, more acrid perfume, the scent of charcoal smoke and something else, something hot and metallic. It's a smell that pricks the back of your throat, a promise of transformation. You follow the sound, a rhythmic, hypnotic whoosh-whoosh of bellows, like the steady, labored breathing of a great, slumbering beast. The source is a compound set a little apart from the main cluster of homes, its red earth courtyard hardened by countless footsteps and stained with dark, ashy patches. This is the domain of the goldsmith, the Sikadwenfo, a place viewed with a mixture of reverence and a touch of fearful awe, for the man who works with the spirit of the earth, Seeker, is no ordinary craftsman. You step into the open workspace, a roof of thatched palm fronds supported by wooden poles, offering shade but no containment for the heat you feel radiating from a small, clay furnace built low to the ground. The goldsmith himself, a man of serious, focused demeanor, barely acknowledges your presence. His world has narrowed to the crucible, a small, bowl-like vessel made of refractory clay, nestled in the heart of the glowing charcoal. With one hand, he works a pair of goatskin bellows, their wooden nozzle aimed precisely at the base of the fire, forcing air into the embers with that same relentless whoosh-whoosh, raising the temperature to an impossible degree. Inside the crucible, a handful of those gold nuggets you saw by the stream, now joined with a pinch of a mysterious dark powder, are beginning to lose their solid form, shimmering like a miniature, malevolent sun. This is the pivotal moment, the alchemical transition from solid to liquid, from oath-bound treasure to malleable potential. The goldsmith's assistant, perhaps his son or an apprentice, watches with wide, unblinking eyes, understanding that a single misjudgment, a moment of distraction, could mean the loss of a week's mining labor, or worse, a catastrophic accident. The gold begins to swirl, a vortex of liquid light, and then, all at once, it surrenders. It becomes a pool of pure, incandescent honey, shimmering with a heat you can feel on your skin even from several feet away. The goldsmith ceases his pumping, and with a pair of long, greenwood tongs, he carefully, so carefully, lifts the crucible from the furnace. The world seems to hold its breath. The liquid gold, a miniature captured sunset, glows with an inner fire, and for a breathtaking second, you understand why this metal was considered divine. But this molten metal isn't destined to become a simple ingot or a crude bead. The goldsmith doesn't pour it into a basic mold. Instead, he carries it with a priestly solemnity to a nearby workbench where a different kind of artifact awaits. It's a small, lumpy object the color of dark earth, crisscrossed with fine, spidery lines. It looks fragile, inconsequential next to the glorious, glowing crucible. This is the wax original, the positive around which our story will truly take shape. The goldsmith's movements are now swift, precise, pouring the stream of liquid gold into a small clay funnel, a gate, that leads into the heart of that earthen mold. The gold flows, displacing the thin wax layer which has already been melted and burned out in a preheating fire, a process you missed, but whose essential preparation made this moment possible. It's a mainstream historical fact that this technique, known as lost wax casting, or cire perdue, was mastered by Aachen metalsmiths to an extraordinary degree of finesse, allowing for the creation of incredibly detailed and complex forms that would be impossible to carve or forge. As the gold fills the void, the air hisses and spits, and you catch the faint, ghostly scent of beeswax, a sweet, funerary perfume for the original model that has sacrificed its form to create a permanent, metallic twin. The goldsmith sets the now-filled mold aside to cool, the terrifying, active heat giving way to a slow, patient solidification. The atmosphere in the workshop relaxes by a fraction of a degree. The apprentice might now be sent to fetch water or more charcoal, the mundane tasks returning as the magical climax passes. The goldsmith might finally wipe his brow with the back of his forearm, leaving a smudge of ash, and perhaps even offer you a brief, tired smile, the shared understanding of a danger successfully navigated. Some believe that the success of a pour, the very quality of the final cast, could be influenced by the state of the goldsmith's own spirit. If he were in a state of ritual impurity, or if there was unresolved conflict in his household, the gold might prove rebellious. It could develop pits, cracks, or simply fail to capture the fine details of the wax. The metal was seen as alive, responsive, an active participant in its own creation. It wasn't just a material to be dominated, it was a force to be collaborated with, a concept that would make any modern materials scientist raise an eyebrow, yet one that feels perfectly logical in this world of spirits and earth-forged power. Soon, when the metal is cool enough to handle, the goldsmith will break away the clay investment with a small hammer, a birth of sorts. The object that will emerge will be rough, sprouting sprues of excess metal where the gold flowed in, its surface gritty and matte. It will be a far cry from the polished, eloquent artifact you might be imagining. But the essential transformation is complete. The Earth's treasure has been liquefied, reborn in a new, specific form dictated by a sculptor's hands. Historians still argue whether the knowledge of this sophisticated lost wax process was an independent invention that blossomed right here in the West African forest, a testament to the innate genius of its people, or if it was a technology that migrated across the Sahara along ancient trade routes, being adapted and perfected to suit a new culture and a new artistic vision. The debate continues, as layered and complex as the clay mold now cooling in the workshop. For now, the liquid sun has been tamed, and it waits, hidden in its earthen womb, for its first glimpse of the light. The wait is a tangible thing, a slow, patient pressure in the air of the workshop. The once blazing furnace is now just a mound of warm, grey ash, and the crucible sits empty, a vessel that has fulfilled its destiny. All attention is now on that unassuming lump of clay, the mold that holds the captured, solidifying light within. You watch as the goldsmith, his movements now less frantic and more methodical, picks up a small, wooden mallet and a blunt chisel. He doesn't rush. He places the mold on a sturdy section of tree trunk that serves as an anvil, positions the chisel, and taps. A crisp, cracking sound breaks the silence. He taps again, a little firmer, and a large piece of the fired clay shell falls away, revealing a glimpse of something within, a dull, gritty, yellowish gleam. This is the moment of revelation, the archaeological dig in miniature, and you lean in, as eager as the apprentice who hovers just over your shoulder, to see what form the wax original has bequeathed to the gold. As more of the clay is carefully picked and brushed away, the object emerges in its raw, post-cast state. It's not pretty. It's crusted with burnt investment, a rough, granular texture covering its entire surface. Thin, worm-like lines of excess metal, the sprues and vents that allowed the gold to flow and air to escape, spiderweb from its main body. It looks wounded, incomplete. But the form is unmistakable. Let's say it's a snail, its shell a perfect, descending spiral, its body a sleek, abstract curve. The goldsmith examines it with a critical eye, not yet with pride. He's looking for flaws, a miscast section where the metal didn't flow, a bubble, a crack. He nods, a minute gesture of satisfaction. The cast is sound. The alchemy has worked. The wax model is gone, utterly consumed by the process, its existence now only a memory and a negative space forever filled with gold. This is the core of the lost wax secret, a magic trick where the original vanishes, leaving behind a perfect, metallic ghost. But let's rewind, because the true magic didn't happen at the furnace. It happened days before, in the hands of the sculptor, the Adwumfo. You have to imagine him sitting in the dappled shade of his own compound, a small lump of dark, pliable beeswax softening in his hands from the heat of his own skin. His tools are simple, a few sharpened slivers of wood, a thin metal blade, perhaps a fishbone or a thorn. He kneads the wax, pushing and pulling, his eyes half closed as he visualizes the form within. He isn't just making a shape, he is preparing a vessel for meaning. He begins to model, pinching and coiling the wax to build up the core form of our snail. He uses the wooden point to incise the delicate spiral onto the shell, a single, continuous line that draws the eye inward. He adds tiny pellets of wax for the eyes, a finer thread for the mouth. His movements are sure, practiced, a language spoken directly from his mind into the soft, receptive medium. This is where the artistry truly lives, in this quiet, deliberate modeling. The mainstream historical fact that often gets overlooked is the sheer individuality this process guaranteed. Since the wax original was destroyed in the casting, every single gold weight, even if it depicted the same proverbial subject like a snail, was a unique object. No two were absolutely identical. This wasn't mass production. It was a series of one-off creations, each bearing the subtle, personal signature of the sculptor's touch in the way a line was curved or a texture was applied. The wax was his sketchpad, his diary, his moment of pure, unmediated creation before the industrial, fiery baptism of the cast. Once the wax model is complete, the sculptor then undertakes the less glamorous but equally vital work of creating its ceramic tomb. He paints the delicate wax snail with a thin slurry of very fine, sifted clay, often mixed with something organic like powdered charcoal or even finely ground, used donkey dung. This first coat is applied with a feather or a soft brush, capturing every minute detail of the wax. Then, layer after layer of a coarser clay mix is applied, building up a thick, strong investment mold around the wax, leaving those all-important channels and a pouring cup. This clay shell is then left to dry thoroughly before being heated to melt out the wax, the lost part of lost wax, and preheat the mold for its dramatic encounter with the molten gold. It's a process of building up and breaking down, of creating something beautiful only to destroy it as a necessary step toward creating something permanent. And as you watch the goldsmith now begin the initial cleaning of the rough cast snail, using a metal file to carefully snip off the sprues, you understand that this object is a palimpsest. It contains the memory of the bee's hive in its wax, the sculptor's intention in its form, the fire's fury in its creation, and the earth's treasure in its substance. Historians still argue whether the sculptors who created the wax originals were the same men as the goldsmiths who handled the casting, or if this was a specialized, guild-based division of labor where the model makers were distinct from the metal pourers, a collaboration between two different kinds of artistic intelligence. The seamless final product hides the potential for multiple hands, multiple minds, all contributing to the life of this small, heavy, golden snail now taking its first breath in the world. The newly freed golden snail, now detached from its sprue-laden umbilical cord, sits heavily on the goldsmith's rough-hewn workbench. It's no longer just a curious sculpture or a testament to a clever casting process. Its sheer density gives it a new, profound significance. You pick it up, or rather, you heft it. The weight is surprising, disproportionate to its small size, a compact mass that sits with authority in the center of your palm. This is the moment the object transitions from art to instrument, from a representation to a tool of function. This little brass snail, and yes, we must call it brass now, for you've just learned a mainstream historical fact that appends the golden narrative. The vast majority of these weights were not made from pure gold, but from a brass alloy, primarily copper with a significant zinc content, often created by smelting together local copper ores and the mineral-rich ore of smithsonite or a similar zinc source. Sometimes, a small amount of silver or even a pinch of gold dust was added to the melt, not for value, but to give the final cast a richer, more golden hue, a clever and economical aesthetic trick. This deliberate use of brass, this Sika futuro or false gold, is a stroke of genius. Gold was the soul of the kingdom, the substance of royal regalia and major transactions, far too precious and politically charged to be scattered about in hundreds, even thousands, of tiny weights for the daily market. Brass, however, was durable, readily available, and could be cast with exquisite detail. Most importantly, it had a consistent, known density. This is the heart of the matter. The weight in your hand is not arbitrary. It is part of a system, a meticulously calibrated scale of measurement that governed every commercial transaction in the Ashanti world, from the purchase of a single egg to the trading of slaves. This system was based on the paredwan, a unit equivalent to a specific weight of gold dust, and our snail, you now understand, is a physical manifestation of a fraction or a multiple of that unit. It is, quite literally, a measure of worth. You look at the snail anew. Its spiral shell is no longer just a beautiful form, it is a guarantee. When a merchant selling cola nuts placed a similar weight on one side of his small, portable balance scale, and poured gold dust from his cast leather pouch onto the other, he was relying on the absolute integrity of this object. The scale had to balance. The weight was the law. It was an agreement cast in metal, a promise that transcended language barriers between traders from different regions. This system provided a stability and a trust that allowed commerce to flourish across the forest zone, creating the economic backbone that supported the sprawling, powerful Ashanti Confederacy. The weight in your hand is a tiny, silent bureaucrat, ensuring fairness and order in the bustling marketplace. But why a snail? Why not a simple cube, a sphere, or a plain geometric disc? A utilitarian society could have stopped there. The fact that they did not is what elevates this from a mere weight to a gold weight. The form is a mnemonic device, a visual and tactile trigger for a deeper concept. The snail, with its slow, deliberate pace and its portable home, is a creature laden with proverbial meaning in Akan culture. It might represent the idea of caution and self-sufficiency. The snail carries its house, meaning a person should be prepared for life's journeys and vicissitudes. Or, its spiral shell could symbolize the cyclical nature of life, or even the interconnectedness of the community. The form isn't random decoration, it's a layer of intellectual and cultural software installed on the hardware of economic measurement. It makes you think. It makes you remember. It turns a simple transaction into a moment of cultural reinforcement. So, as you hold this cool, heavy piece of brass, you are holding a paradox. It is both a standardized, mass-produced, in concept, not in execution, tool of commerce and a unique, hand-sculpted piece of symbolic art. It is an object of pure, rational function and a vessel for proverbial, philosophical wisdom. It is made of a common alloy, yet it measures the most precious substance known to the kingdom. This duality is its power. Historians still argue whether the proverbial meanings were rigidly codified, with each form having a single, universally understood message, or if the interpretation was more fluid, allowing the owner or the context of the transaction to bring their own nuance to the symbol's meaning. Was the snail always and only about caution, or could its meaning shift slightly depending on whether it was used to weigh out gold for a bride price or to pay a fine for a transgression? The debate simmers, much like the quiet, patient intelligence of the snail itself, offering no easy answers, only a profound depth. You set the snail down, its proverbial weight lingering in your mind, and your gaze sweeps across the goldsmith's bench. It's not a solitary snail sitting there. He has a small, worn leather pouch, and as he loosens the drawstring and tips it, a collection of other small, brass figures clinks and tumbles out onto the wooden surface. It's a sudden, silent parliament of forms, a menagerie of meaning. Here lies a coiled serpent, there a squat, powerful-looking sword, next to it a drum, and beside that, a leaping fish. This is no random assortment. Each one, you now understand, is a word in a visual language, a concrete symbol for an abstract idea. The gold weight is not just a weight, it is a proverb made solid, a piece of advice or social commentary you can literally hold in your hand. This system of symbolic communication is where the ordinary transcends into the philosophical, where commerce conducts a conversation about life itself. Take that sword, for instance. It's not merely a weapon, it's an Athena, a state sword, a symbol of royal authority and power. But its proverbial meaning cuts deeper. It might represent the saying, "A ruler's sword is not used to brush away flies," implying that serious power should not be wasted on trivial matters. In the context of a transaction, its presence on the scale could be a subtle reminder to both parties to act with the seriousness and integrity befitting the occasion, to not demean the process with petty haggling or deceit. Or, consider the drum, the fontomphrum or talking drum. It symbolizes communication, the call to assembly, the spreading of news. Its proverbial meaning could be, the drum does not sound unless it is struck, advising that action and initiative are required for anything to happen, a nudge to conclude the deal, to stop deliberating and act. This practice of embedding proverbs, or ebe, into everyday objects is a mainstream historical fact that reveals the profound depth of Akan culture. Wisdom wasn't locked away in books or reserved for elders in secluded councils. It was woven into the fabric of daily life, from the patterns stamped onto cloth to the designs painted on houses, and most tangibly, in the brass weights used in the market. It was a continuous, low-frequency broadcast of cultural values, of wisdom, patience, courage, respect, and caution, ensuring that every generation internalized these lessons simply by living. A child growing up in this world would learn the meaning of these symbols as naturally as they learned language, absorbing a whole ethical framework through sight and touch. Now, let's look at that leopard, captured in a frozen, powerful stride. On the surface, it's a symbol of courage, strength, and royal ferocity. The leopard is the king of the forest, after all. Some weights depict the leopard not in a heroic pose, but in more ambiguous scenarios. There's a famous proverb, "The leopard's lick spot is not washed off," referring to the dark spots on its tongue, meaning one's true nature cannot be hidden forever. A weight depicting a leopard could, therefore, be a warning. In a transaction, it might remind you that a deceptive nature will eventually be revealed. The same majestic creature can symbolize noble strength or an unavoidable, inherent truth, depending on the context and the nuance the owner brings to it. It's this fluidity that makes the language so rich and so personal. And then there are the more enigmatic, human-like figures. You see one now, a seated person, their head tilted, one hand resting on their chin. This is the Aqua Ba, or Aqua's child, a wooden doll used by young women in prayers for fertility and beauty. But cast in brass as a weight, its meaning shifts. It becomes a symbol of beauty, care, and nurturing. A proverb associated with it might be, "The beauty of a woman is not only in her face," pointing to inner qualities. Used in a market transaction, perhaps for the purchase of fine shea butter or expensive cosmetics. It could infuse the exchange with a sense of valuing true, holistic beauty over superficial appearance. Each weight you pick up is a key to a different room in the mansion of Akan thought. Historians still argue whether this vast lexicon of symbols was a fully coherent, universally taught language where every educated person in the empire knew the exact proverb for every single weight, or if it was a more organic, regional, and even personal system, where a core set of well-known symbols existed alongside more obscure ones whose meanings were known only to their owners or local communities. Was there a formal school, a curriculum for goldweight literacy? Or was it knowledge passed down informally, through family lines and guild apprenticeships, with meanings sometimes evolving or being forgotten and reinvented over time? The sheer number of distinct forms, running into the hundreds, suggests a system of incredible complexity, one that we on the outside can only partially decode, like a forgotten script where we have the alphabet but have lost most of the stories. The leather pouch seems bottomless, a storyteller's bag of tricks, and with each new clink of brass on wood, another character steps onto the stage. The serpent, the sword, the drum, they were the orators, the nobles. But now, a different cast emerges, the creatures of the world you just walked through, each carrying a tale not just of proverbial wisdom, but of a lived reality. A crocodile, its jaw hinged in a perpetual, toothy grin, sits with a heavy, predatory patience. A scorpion, its tail arched in a delicate, deadly curve, seems to dare you to pick it up. A bird pecks at the ground, forever frozen in its search for sustenance. This is the courtly menagerie, the entire ecosystem of the forest and the savanna, miniaturized and immortalized in metal, serving as both weight and witness to the world from which they were drawn. Look at this spider, its legs carefully splayed, its body a rounded abdomen. This is no ordinary arachnid. This is Anansi, the trickster god, the central character in a vast web of folklore. Anansi is the clever, sometimes greedy, always ingenious spider who outsmarts larger, more powerful animals and even gods. He is the spirit of storytelling itself. To have an Anansi weight on your scale was to invoke a whole universe of narrative. It could be a playful reminder that cleverness can trump brute force in business, or a more cynical warning to be wary of deceptive deals. After all, Anansi is the ultimate trickster. He represents the understanding that the world isn't always fair or straightforward. Sometimes, you need wit and guile to navigate it. Then there is the elephant, a massive, pillar-legged weight that would have represented a significant unit of gold dust. The elephant is the ultimate symbol of power, strength, and chiefly authority. The elephant does not joke with its trunk, meaning a leader's word is final. But its meaning is also tied to its nature. A mainstream historical fact, often recorded by early European visitors, was the immense value placed on ivory within the Ashanti economy. The elephant weight, therefore, isn't just a symbol of abstract power, it's a direct reference to a major source of that power, the ivory trade. It connects the abstract world of proverbs to the very concrete, material wealth derived from the land and its creatures. Holding this weight, you are holding the concept of kingship, the reality of the hunt, and the economy of a luxury good, all compressed into one dense, brass object. But the menagerie isn't all power and trickery. There is a tenderness here, too. You find a hen, surrounded by a cluster of chicks. The proverb is simple and universal: a mother hen knows her chicks. It speaks to care, protection, and the intimate knowledge within a family or community. In a transaction, it could be a reminder of trust, of the bonds that underpin even commercial exchanges. Or it could be used in a more specific context, perhaps related to a family matter or the purchase of goods for the household. Similarly, a pair of fish, swimming in unison, might symbolize marriage, cooperation, and fertility. Two fish in the water do not make the water dirty. meaning harmony is possible even in close quarters. These weights ground the high-minded proverbs in the daily, domestic rhythms of life. And then you see the more unsettling residents of this brass zoo. The scorpion, whose mere presence is a whole sentence. The scorpion says if it stings a fowl, the fowl will die. If it stings a duiker, the duiker will die. It's a stark symbol of universal danger and the fact that some threats are absolute, regardless of your status. The crocodile, often depicted with a barbell-shaped object or a stone in its mouth, represents the saying, "The crocodile does not swallow a stone for nothing," implying there is always a reason, a hidden motive, behind an action. To see this weight on a merchant scale was to be put on notice. Look deeper, question the surface, understand the true stakes. This was a culture that did not look away from the harsher truths of existence. It codified them in brass and placed them at the heart of its economic life. Historians still argue whether the choice of a specific animal for a person's set of weights was purely practical, simply acquiring the standard units needed for trade, or if it was a deeply personal form of expression, a way to curate a collection that reflected one's own personality, social status, or family history. Did a fierce, ambitious merchant choose leopards and swords, while a gentle, family-oriented one selected hens and fish? Or were the sets pre-made by the artisans, with the buyer having little say in the symbolism? The evidence is silent, leaving us to wonder if these menageries were standardized toolkits or deeply personal autobiographies in brass, each pouch a miniature portrait of its owner's soul. Amidst the sprawling brass menagerie, the forms that often give you pause are the human ones. They are not realistic portraits. There are no finely chiseled features, no attempts at individual likeness. Instead, they are elegant reductions, abstractions of the human form that speak a language of geometry and essence rather than flesh and blood. You pick one up. It is a seated figure, its torso a simple, elongated oval, its arms and legs cylindrical rods bent at the joints, the head a smooth, ovoid sphere. The face may have two small dots for eyes and a single line for a mouth, or it may be completely blank, a serene, featureless plane. This is not a failure of skill, far from it. This is a deliberate artistic choice, a mainstream historical fact of Akan aesthetics that values the conceptual and the symbolic over mere physical representation. The human form, in this context, is a vessel for ideas about status, relationship, and the soul. This particular seated figure, with its calm, upright posture, likely represents a person of status, an elder or a chief in a moment of contemplation or judgment. Its simplicity conveys dignity and authority without the need for ostentatious detail. The focus is on the state of being, not the individual. You might find another figure in a more active pose, perhaps holding a tool or a weapon, a curved knife for harvesting, a sword, or a musket. These figures tell stories of occupation and social role: the farmer, the warrior, the hunter. They are visual shorthand for the various cogs that make the community function, each one respected and essential. To see such a weight used in trade was to be subtly reminded of the interconnectedness of the society you were dealing in, a society built on the labor and roles of its people. Then there are the more intimate pairings. Two figures seated facing each other, their simplified forms mirroring one another. This could represent a council, a negotiation, a marriage, or simply the proverb, "Two heads are better than one." The meaning is baked into the composition itself. Another powerful motif is the figure carrying another on its back. This is a direct illustration of the proverb, "You help someone climb a tree, and they end up looking into your mother's compound." It's a complex, slightly cynical saying about the risks of generosity and how help can sometimes lead to a betrayal of intimacy or an overstepping of boundaries. The weight becomes a frozen narrative, a single frame from a story every Akan person would instantly recognize, injecting a layer of social commentary into the act of weighing gold dust. Some collectors and scholars have speculated that the most simplified, almost alien-looking human forms, with their elongated necks and highly stylized features, might not be human at all. They could represent Moesha, the little forest dwarfs or sprites of Akan folklore, believed to be powerful, supernatural beings who lived in the deep forest and could bring great fortune or misfortune to hunters and travelers. If true, this adds a whole other dimension. A weight depicting a Moesha would be a tangible connection to the spirit world, a charm or a warning carried right in the merchant's pouch, blending commerce with the supernatural in a way that feels perfectly natural in this worldview. The beauty of these human forms lies in their universal accessibility. Because they are not specific, they are open to interpretation. They are like pronouns in a visual language: he, she, they, the chief, the helper, the betrayer. They require the viewer, and the user, to complete the story. This abstraction is what makes them so enduringly powerful. They don't age in the way a realistic portrait does. They remain timeless symbols of human states and relationships. They are a reminder that before photography, before hyperrealistic sculpture, the goal of art was often not to replicate what the eye sees, but to represent what the mind knows and the soul feels. Historians still argue whether the evolution of these human forms, from possibly more naturalistic early examples to the highly abstract ones we most commonly associate with the tradition, was a purely internal artistic evolution, a refinement towards a purer aesthetic ideal, or if it was influenced by external pressures, such as increased demand leading to a need for faster, more streamlined production. Was it a philosophical choice driven by deep-seated cultural values, or an economic one driven by the artisans' need to produce more weights in less time? The truth likely sits, as it often does, in a blend of both, where artistic philosophy and commercial practicality dance together, resulting in these sublime, silent, and profoundly human figures. Your fingers, still tracing the smooth, abstract curves of a human figure, now drift towards a different cluster of weights on the bench. Here, the world of living forms falls away, replaced by a landscape of pure geometry. A perfect circle, a square, a cross, a series of concentric rings, a spiral that echoes the snail's shell but is stripped of its biological reference. These are not empty shapes. They feel heavier, somehow more serious, as if they contain the bedrock principles upon which the more playful menagerie is built. This is the grammar of the Goldweight language, the fundamental syntax of order, balance, and cosmic thinking that underpin the Akan worldview. In these precise angles and perfect curves, you are looking at a map of a philosophical universe, cast in brass. Take the simple circle. It is a universal symbol of wholeness, unity, and the cyclical nature of existence. The sun, the moon, the unbroken cycle of life, death, and rebirth. In the context of the scale, it represents a complete, unbroken unit, a perfect transaction with no loose ends. The square, with its 4 equal sides, is a symbol of stability, law, order, and the 4 corners of the earth or the universe. A weight of this shape was a miniature assertion that commerce, and indeed life, should be conducted within a framework of fairness and structure. Then there is the cross, or the simple 4-point star. It could represent the crossroads, a place of decision, of meeting, and in Akan tradition, a point of spiritual power where one might leave an offering for the gods. Using such a weight was a reminder that every transaction, every deal, is a crossroads of sorts, a moment of choice with consequences. These shapes are not arbitrary. A mainstream historical fact, supported by the study of older weight sets, is that the geometric forms are often among the most ancient, believed by some scholars to predate the more figurative weights. They are the foundational layer of the system, the original units of measurement that spoke a purely mathematical language before they were joined by the proverbial menagerie. They are the bones of the tradition, and their persistent use alongside the elaborate figures of animals and people shows that this society never lost its appreciation for the beauty and authority of pure form, for the intellectual satisfaction of a perfect shape that represents a perfect measure. But the geometry gets more complex, and with complexity comes deeper meaning. You find a weight that is a series of concentric circles, like the ripples from a stone dropped in a pond. This could symbolize the far-reaching impact of one's actions, the way a single decision in the marketplace can ripple outwards through the community. Another weight might be a spiral, not a snail's shell, but a freestanding, abstract spiral. This is a powerful symbol of journey, evolution, and the path to knowledge. It is a path that leads inward to deeper understanding as much as it leads outward. Holding this weight, you are holding the concept of a life's path, of growth that is not linear but cyclical and expanding. Some of the most intricate geometric patterns, particularly those involving interlocking lines and grids, bear a striking, and likely not coincidental, resemblance to the boards used for playing Oa or Mancala, the ancient strategy game popular across Africa. The game is a test of foresight, calculation, and tactical capture. Could a weight with this design have been a subtle nod to the strategic thinking required for successful trade? It's a charming thought, that a merchant, in the midst of a negotiation, would place a weight on his scale that silently advised his counterpart to think several moves ahead, just as in the game. It transforms the scale from a simple measuring device into a board for intellectual and social chess. These geometric weights are the quiet intellectuals of the collection. They don't tell stories of leopards or trickster spiders. They speak the language of mathematicians and philosophers. They are about relationship, proportion, and the hidden structures that govern the visible world. They remind you that for all the vibrant, chaotic life of the forest and the market, the Akan mind also sought and revered pattern, symmetry, and underlying order. Historians still argue whether the specific meanings of these geometric forms were as clearly defined and proverbial as those for the figurative weights, or if they represented a more fluid set of concepts related to harmony, balance, and the cosmos. Their interpretation left more to the intuition of the user. Were the circle, the square, and the cross as clearly read as the leopard and the sword, or were they felt more than spoken, understood in the gut as principles of a well-ordered universe? The silence of these perfect shapes offers no easy answer, only a profound and heavy elegance. The geometric weights lie still and pensive on the bench, their silent intellectualism a stark contrast to the memory of the furnace. That memory now returns with a visceral rush as the goldsmith prepares for another pour. The theoretical, the symbolic, the philosophical, all of it must, eventually, pass through the trial by fire. You watch as he selects a new, clay-encased mold from a row of them, each one looking like a small, unremarkable mud brick. But inside each is a void, a negative space shaped by a lost wax original, a hidden potential waiting for its moment of metallic baptism. He uses a thick, greenwood paddle to scoop a fresh heap of glowing charcoal from a secondary fire, transferring it to the main furnace, building the heat back up to that terrifying, necessary intensity. The whoosh-whoosh of the bellows begins again, a rhythmic incantation that stirs the embers from orange to a searing, blinding white. This is the moment of truth, repeated over and over in the life of a goldsmith. It never becomes routine. You see the focus etched on his face, a mask of concentration in the hellish light of the furnace. The crucible, loaded with carefully measured pieces of brass, is nestled deep into the coals. The air shimmers with heat, distorting your vision. The ambient sounds of the village, children playing, women pounding fufu, fade into a distant hum, irrelevant now. The only reality is the fire, the metal, and the mold. This preheating of the mold is a critical step, a mainstream historical fact of the casting process that separates success from failure. If the mold is cold when the molten metal hits it, the thermal shock will cause it to crack, or the metal will freeze prematurely before it can fill the finest details, resulting in a miscast, a flawed, incomplete thing. The mold must be brought to a high temperature, so that the liquid metal flows through its channels like water, embracing every intricate contour left by the vanished wax. The goldsmith tests the heat of the mold by spitting a tiny amount of saliva onto its clay surface. It doesn't sizzle, it instantly vanishes in a puff of steam. It's ready. He now turns his attention back to the crucible. The brass inside isn't the shimmering, golden liquid of pure gold. It has a different viscosity, a reddish gold glow. He gives it a stir with a clean, charcoal-tipped rod, skimming off any dross that has risen to the surface. The moment of transformation is near. The atmosphere in the workshop is taut. The apprentice, who had been fetching water, is now frozen in place, watching the crucible as if it were a living creature about to give birth. The goldsmith takes a final, deep breath, his body coiling like a spring. Then, with the tongs, he lifts the crucible. It's a movement of pure, hardened grace, a dance with danger perfected over a lifetime. The pour is a swift, decisive act. There is no hesitation. The stream of liquid brass, glowing like lava, arcs through the air and pours neatly into the funnel-like gate of the preheated mold. It doesn't splash, it is swallowed whole. A faint, sweet-smelling wisp of smoke, the last ghost of the clay's organic binder, curls up from the mold as the metal charges in. The goldsmith holds the crucible steady until the last drop falls, then sets it aside. The active, furious part is over. Now, the slow, patient part begins again. He places the filled mold into a pot of warm ash to cool as slowly as possible, preventing stress and cracking within the metal itself. The tension breaks. The goldsmith might finally release the breath he was holding, and the apprentice relaxes his stance. It was sometimes said that the ideal sound of the molten metal flowing into the mold was a soft, gurgling sigh, not a violent splash or a hiss. A good pour was a quiet one, a smooth, seamless filling. A noisy, sputtering pour could mean trapped air, which would lead to bubbles and flaws in the final cast. The best goldsmiths, they said, could hear a successful cast. It was a synesthetic skill, where the sound of the flow was as important a diagnostic tool as the sight of it. This intimate, sensory knowledge, passed from master to apprentice, is the kind of unrecorded wisdom that filled these workshops, a hidden science of sight, sound, and smell that governed the birth of every single weight. As you watch the filled mold begin its slow journey back to room temperature, you understand that this is the fragile hinge upon which the entire tradition swings. All the careful wax modeling, the philosophical contemplation of form, the proverbial wisdom, all of it is utterly dependent on this brutal, physical alchemy. A flawed pour means a lost proverb, a silent symbol, a wasted effort. Historians still argue whether the high failure rate of these casts, estimated by some to be as high as 1 in 3, was simply an accepted cost of doing business, factored into the price of the weights, or if it contributed to a kind of natural selection where only the most perfectly made molds, prepared by the most skilled artisans, survived to produce the weights we find and admire today. Was every successful weight a minor miracle, a survivor of a fiery gauntlet? The dark, quiet furnace offers no reply, its work done for now. The filled mold rests, a dormant seed in its pot of warm ashes, and the workshop settles into a different kind of work, one of patience and precision. The drama of the furnace is a memory, replaced by the quiet, methodical sounds of finishing. After what feels like an age, the goldsmith deems the cast cool enough to handle. He lifts the now cooled mold, its clay shell dark and sooty, and returns it to the tree trunk anvil. Again comes the small mallet and chisel. This time, The cracking of the clay is less a moment of high suspense and more the beginning of a delicate excavation. He doesn't brute force it. He picks and pries, flaking away the investment to avoid scratching the soft metal within. A shape emerges, but it is still a rough ghost of itself, a Cinderella still covered in the ashes of the hearth. This is the raw cast, and it is a far cry from the polished artifact of a museum display case. It's covered in a hard, black scale of burnt-on clay and carbon, its surface matte and gritty. The sprues and vents, the metal that filled the channels, are now ugly, hardened drips and protrusions, like grotesque growths on the otherwise clean form. Let's say it's that abstract human figure again, but now it looks like it's been through a battle, encrusted and disfigured by the process of its own creation. The goldsmith picks it up, turns it over in his hand, and gives a grunt of appraisal. The cast is solid. No major holes, no catastrophic cracks. The journey from this rough state to a finished weight is now a test of his skill as a finisher, a Sikad-Wenfo in the truest sense of the word. He reaches for his files. They are simple things, pieces of hardened iron with teeth cut into them, but they are his primary tools of transformation. He clamps the weight in a wooden vise or holds it firm against a leather pad on his thigh. The first task is to remove the sprues. The screech of metal on metal is jarring after the quiet, a sharp, grating song of subtraction. He files carefully, cutting away the excess until it is flush with the main body of the figure. He is not just removing waste, he is redefining the form, restoring the clean lines the sculptor originally intended. This is a mainstream historical fact often overlooked. A significant portion of the final object's aesthetic is determined in this post-casting phase. The artisan's eye and hand are just as crucial here as they were in the wax modeling stage. A poorly finished weight, with jagged file marks or uneven surfaces, would be a failure, no matter how perfect the cast. Once the sprues are gone, he moves on to the entire surface. With a finer file, he begins to smooth away the gritty, burnt crust, revealing the true metal beneath. It's a slow, deliberate process, like an archaeologist carefully brushing dust from a fossil. The brass begins to show itself, not yet bright, but a dull, warm yellow. He works the file over every curve, every plane, every detail of the face or the body, ensuring a uniform surface. For the intricate details, the spiral of a snail's shell, the pattern on a drum head, the eyes of a figure, he might use even finer tools, sharpened nails, slivers of stone, or abrasive leaves from a particular tree. This is where the weight truly comes to life, where it ceases to be a product of a violent process and starts to become a refined object of art and function. Some finishers were said to have their own secret soup for the final polish. After the filing was done, they might use a paste made from the fine ash of a particular wood, mixed with water or oil, and a soft cloth or even their own palm to burnish the surface to a soft, low luster. Others might use a specific type of smooth, water-worn river stone. The goal wasn't a mirror-like, industrial shine, but a warm, glowing patina that felt good in the hand and pleased the eye. This final touch was the weight's first bath, washing away the last remnants of its fiery birth and presenting it to the world as a complete, dignified entity. After hours of this meticulous work, the goldsmith holds the finished weight up to the light filtering through the thatched roof. It is transformed. The rough cast brute is gone. In its place is that elegant, abstract human figure, its surfaces smooth, its lines clean, its form now clear and legible. It feels solid, honest, and heavy with purpose. He might weigh it now on a delicate scale against a known standard, a final check to ensure it fulfills its primary, metrological duty. If it's correct, he will place it with the others, ready for its journey into the world. Historians still argue whether the finishing process was considered a separate, specialized trade from the wax sculpting and the casting, or if the same artisan, the master goldsmith, would typically see a piece through from the first kneading of the beeswax to this final, polished state, maintaining a continuous artistic vision from start to finish. The seamless final product suggests a single guiding intelligence, but the sheer variety of skill sets involved hints at the potential for collaboration. The finished figure, now silent and perfect, keeps its secrets. The finished weight, now cool and smooth and perfect, does not linger long on the goldsmith's bench. Its creation is complete, but its purpose is just beginning. You watch as he gathers it, along with the others from this week's work, and places them carefully into a small, finely woven basket. He covers them with a piece of dark cloth, a gesture of respect for the value and meaning they now carry. Then he stands, and you follow him out of the workshop's dimness and back into the vibrant, noisy life of the village. His destination is clear: the marketplace, the economic heart where these objects of art and intellect will become tools of trade. This journey from the artisan's hand to the user's pouch is the final link in the chain, the moment the weight enters the stream of daily life and history. The path to the market is a wide, red earth road, packed hard by countless feet. You pass women balancing enormous baskets of produce on their heads, their spines straight and graceful. You hear the chatter of different languages, the laughter of children, the bleating of goats being driven to sale. The air, once thick with the scent of forest and furnace, is now a rich stew of wood smoke, drying fish, spicy peppers, and the sweet, overripe smell of mangoes and plantains. As you approach the market clearing, the sound swells into a cacophony, a symphony of haggling, greeting, and commerce. This is where the weight will find its home, in the leather pouch of a merchant, a man whose life is built on trust, calculation, and the consistent, honest measure of value. The goldsmith doesn't just wander in, he has his regular clients. He approaches a kola nut merchant, a man seated on a low stool behind a mat piled high with the bitter, caffeine-rich nuts, prized for their use as a stimulant and a ceremonial gift. The two men greet each other with a familiar ease. The merchant, let's call him Kofi, has a well-worn, brass-tipped balance scale set up before him. The goldsmith unveils his basket. Kofi picks up the newly finished abstract human figure, hefting it, feeling its balance in his palm, his merchant's eye assessing the quality of the finish. He nods, satisfied. He then takes a known weight from his own pouch, a simple geometric cube, and places it on one side of his scale. He places the new figure on the other. The scale balances perfectly. The weight has been verified. A transaction is made, not with the weight, but for the weight. Kofi pays the goldsmith in cowrie shells, the common currency for everyday items, or perhaps in a measure of gold dust itself, weighed out using his existing set. The new weight is now his. This integration into a working set is a mainstream historical fact that reveals the practical reality of the system. A merchant's pouch was not a random collection of art objects, it was a calibrated toolkit. It contained weights of various units and fractions, a heavy elephant for large transactions, a medium-sized leopard for mid-range deals, our human figure for a specific, smaller measure, and tiny geometric chips for the finest adjustments. A full set was a sign of a serious, established trader. When a customer approached to buy a specific quantity of kola nuts, Kofi would select the appropriate weight, place it on one scale, and carefully pour gold dust from his small, leather furrower, or gold dust bottle, onto the other until the beam hung level. The weight was the silent, third party to every deal, the physical embodiment of the agreement. Its proverbial meaning, in this context, was secondary to its function, a silent bonus of wisdom accompanying the hard facts of economics. But the journey isn't always to a local market trader. Some weights, especially the finest, most intricate, or heaviest examples, were destined for a more exalted clientele. The goldsmith might be summoned to the court of a local chief or even the Ashanti himself. In these royal contexts, the weights took on an additional layer of significance. They were used to measure gold for state functions, tributary payments, gifts to allies, the weighing of gold dust for the royal treasury, which was itself a massive, beautifully crafted brass pot that was ceremonially buried and dug up for audits. A weight used in the royal court wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of the state's authority and its control over the economy. Its proverbial meaning, perhaps a leopard representing the king's power, was directly and powerfully reinforced by its use. It was believed by some that a new weight wasn't truly awake until it had been used in a successful, fair transaction. Its first use was a kind of naming ceremony, where it fulfilled its destiny and absorbed a bit of the life and energy of the marketplace. A weight that sat unused was just a dormant piece of brass. But one that was constantly handled, that passed through many transactions, was thought to accumulate a kind of luck or wisdom, becoming a trusted partner to its owner. It was more than an object, it was a participant. As you watch Kofi the merchant add the new weight to his pouch, hearing the soft clink as it joins its brass brethren, you understand that this is the culmination of the entire process. The gold from the earth, the skill of the sculptor, the fury of the furnace, the patience of the finisher, all of it has led to this moment, where this object takes its place as a fundamental cog in a sophisticated, thriving, and culturally rich civilization. Historians still argue whether the ownership of these weights was widespread among the general populace for daily market shopping, or if they were primarily the tools of professional merchants and the state, with common people engaging in more simple barter for their everyday needs. Was every household likely to have a small set, or was this the specialized equipment of the commercial class? The evidence, like the weights themselves, is weighted towards the professional, but the truth likely lay in a spectrum, from the humble farmer selling his surplus to the grand merchant prince funding the kingdom's ambitions. The familiar, comforting clink of brass weights in Kofi's pouch, the steady hum of the market, the very world you have been immersed in, it all begins to fray at the edges, like a cloth stretched too thin. A new sound enters the atmosphere, distant at first, then growing steadily louder. It is not the rhythmic beat of a talking drum, but the percussive, alien crack of gunfire. The air, once rich with the smells of commerce and community, now carries the acrid tang of black powder. The year is 1874, and the British are coming. The British Expeditionary Force, armed with modern rifles and field artillery, is pushing towards Kumasi, the Ashanti capital, in the Third Anglo-Ashanti War. The world of the Goldweight, a world built on intricate balance and proverbial wisdom, is about to be slammed by a force that speaks only the language of raw imperial power. You see the change first in the market. The easy banter of haggling turns to hushed, anxious whispers. Kofi quickly gathers his scales and his pouch, his face a mask of grim concern. The gold weights, once symbols of stable value, suddenly feel like relics. The British aren't interested in proverbial snails or abstract human figures. They are interested in submission, in treaties, in the outright confiscation of the kingdom's gold and the dismantling of its power. The British victory and subsequent sacking of Kumasi, a mainstream historical fact, was a catastrophic, humiliating blow to the Ashanti Confederacy. The British looted everything they could lay their hands on, from golden regalia to, almost as an afterthought, thousands of these brass weights, which they saw as curious native artifacts or simple scrap metal. In a single, violent convulsion, the context that gave the weights their meaning was shattered. In the aftermath, nothing is the same. The Asante is exiled. The British impose a protectorate. The old economic structures, so carefully balanced around the gold dust and brass weight system, are deliberately undermined. The British introduce their own currency, coins bearing the face of a foreign monarch, and demand taxes be paid in this new, alien medium of exchange. The portable scales and leather pouches begin to disappear from the marketplace, replaced by the jingle of sterling. The knowledge, the need, the very reason for being for the Goldweights is systematically erased. The artisans, the Sikadwenfo, find their trade vanishing. There are no new commissions for weights. The sacred fire of the furnace is extinguished, not for a day, but seemingly forever. The tradition, which had survived for centuries, enters a sudden, deep freeze. Some stories persist that in the remote, hidden villages, a few goldsmiths continued to produce weights in secret, not for use in a dead economy, but as acts of quiet resistance, as a way of preserving a flicker of cultural memory. These later weights, it is said, can sometimes be identified by their cruder workmanship, made from whatever scrap metal was available, as if the act of creation itself was more important than the perfection of the object. They were hidden away, becoming family heirlooms of a lost world, talismans against the overwhelming tide of change. They were no longer tools of commerce, but became symbols of identity and a defiance that refused to be entirely extinguished. For the weights that were looted, their journey was even more bizarre and dislocating. They were packed into crates and shipped across the ocean to England, where they entered a different kind of marketplace, the world of curiosity collectors, museums, and scrap metal dealers. In the hushed, sterile halls of the British Museum or the Victoria and Albert Museum, a weight that once ensured a fair price for kola nuts in a sun-drenched market now sat behind glass, a labeled specimen of primitive African art. Its functional life was over. It was now an object of anthropological study, its soul stripped away along with the dust of the market from its surface. It became a silent prisoner, a witness to the power of the very empire that had conquered its homeland. This colonial shock was not just a military defeat, it was a cosmological one. The entire universe of meaning, where a leopard weight represented royal authority, a spider weight celebrated cleverness, and a geometric shape spoke of cosmic order, was rendered obsolete, a quaint folklore in the face of steam engines, Maxim guns, and colonial administration. The balance had been permanently, violently tipped. Historians still argue whether the collapse of the Goldweight tradition was an inevitable, immediate consequence of the British military victory and subsequent economic policies, or if it was a slower, more lingering death, with the weights clinging to a shadowy, diminished existence in rural markets for a few more decades before finally fading away. The evidence points to a rapid and decisive end for the tradition as a living, breathing practice, a direct casualty of colonial ambition and the forced integration of West Africa into a global economy that had no room for its unique, brass-hearted soul. The crack of gunfire fades into the echo of history, leaving behind a profound and unsettling silence. The vibrant, chaotic marketplace that was the Goldweight's natural habitat is gone, replaced by the hushed, orderly aisles of a museum. You are no longer in the warm, open-air workshop. You are standing in a climate-controlled room, your footsteps muffled by plush carpet, the air smelling of lemon-scented polish and slow decay. Before you is a glass case, lit from above by a cool, artificial light that throws no shadow. Inside, arranged on a minimalist platform of dark gray felt, are a dozen gold weights. There is the snail, the leopard, the abstract human figure, the geometric cross. They are clean. Impeccably so. Every speck of market dust, every faint fingerprint of a long-dead merchant, every trace of the life they once lived has been scrubbed away by a curator's careful hand. This is their afterlife, a kind of elegant purgatory. They are prisoners of display, their labels typed in a neat, impersonal font. Brass weight, Ashanti, 19th century. Used for measuring gold dust. The description is factually correct, and yet it tells you nothing. It says nothing of the proverb, nothing of the sculptor's breath on the wax, nothing of the furnace's fury, nothing of Kofi the kola nut merchant and the trust placed in this object's unwavering mass. The label reduces a universe of meaning to a simple, functional descriptor. This is the mainstream historical fate of countless cultural artifacts, stripped of context and enshrined as art or specimen, their primary purpose becoming their secondary, forgotten characteristic. They are admired for their form, their aesthetic, while their soul is left behind in a different world. You walk from case to case, a ghost in this temple of stolen memories. The weights are segregated, categorized. All the human figures are here, all the animals in another case, the geometric forms in a third. This orderliness is a lie. It betrays the reality of the leather pouch, where a spider would clink against a sword, a hen would nestle next to a crocodile, a vibrant, democratic jumble of wisdom and warning. Here, they are isolated, silent, unable to speak to one another. The museum, for all its good intentions, has imposed its own taxonomy, its own way of seeing, upon a system it only partially understands. The weights have become data points in a Western narrative of collection and classification. Some museum conservators have reported, almost sheepishly, that when handling these weights, particularly late at night in the quiet storage rooms, they sometimes feel a sudden, unexpected warmth from the brass, as if it still holds a memory of the human hands that once constantly held it. Or, more fancifully, that weights stored closely together in drawers seem to develop a faint, harmonious hum, a silent conversation between exiled kin. Of course, this is dismissed as imagination, the power of suggestion, or simple changes in room temperature. But it speaks to the uncanny power these objects still hold, a lingering energy that resists total erasure, even in the heart of the institution that preserves and neutralizes them in the same act. This preservation is a double-edged sword. On one hand, these museums saved the weights from being melted down for scrap during the colonial and post-colonial periods. They ensured their physical survival. But on the other hand, they froze them in a single moment of interpretation, often a flawed or incomplete one. For decades, the profound proverbial meanings were ignored or unknown to the curators who displayed them. They were seen as charming, decorative weights, their intellectual and philosophical sophistication completely overlooked. It has taken the work of later scholars, often from Ghana itself, to begin reinfusing these silent displays with the stories they were meant to tell, to translate the visual language that the colonial collectors were deaf to. As you stand there, your own reflection faintly visible in the glass, superimposed over the silent menagerie, you become part of this complex dynamic. You are the observer, the beneficiary of this preservation, yet also complicit in the act of viewing them as artifacts of a concluded past. The question hangs in the quiet air. Are these weights more alive here, safe and studded, or were they more alive when they were worn, dirty, and essential in a market that no longer exists? Historians still argue whether the mass removal of these objects to Western museums, for all its problematic origins, inadvertently created a centralized, protected archive that has actually enabled modern scholarship and cultural revival, or if it fundamentally severed the living thread between the objects and the people whose cultural heritage they represent, turning a living tradition into a dead collection. There is no easy answer, only the quiet weight of the brass behind the glass, and the heavy silence of a story half told. The sterile, silent air of the museum seems to press in on you, a tomb for a still living tradition. But then, a sound, faint at first, then growing clearer, breaks the silence. It is the sound of a hammer on metal, not the crash of industrial machinery, but the precise, rhythmic tap of a small tool. You turn a corner, following the sound, and the museum dissolves around you. You are back in Ghana, but in a modern studio. The walls are concrete, a fan whirs overhead, and the light comes from a fluorescent tube, not a thatched roof. But the essence is the same. A man sits at a bench, a lump of dark, pliable beeswax softening in his hands. He is a modern carver, an artist, and he is rekindling the flame. This is not mere replication, It is resurrection with intent. The artist, let's call him Kwame, is part of a movement of contemporary Ghanaian artists who are reclaiming this heritage, not as a dead artifact to be copied, but as a living vocabulary to be spoken in a modern context. He isn't making weights for a gold dust economy that is gone. He is creating sculptures, artworks that use the forms, the proverbs, and the lost wax technique to comment on today's world. He picks up a sharpened tool and begins to model the wax. The form that emerges is familiar. It's that abstract human figure, the Aqua Ba doll. But something is different. This figure is holding a mobile phone to its featureless ear. The proverb is being updated, transformed. It might now speak to the modern paradox of connection and isolation, or the globalized village. This conscious revival is a mainstream historical fact of the post-colonial era, a key part of Ghana's cultural renaissance. Artists like Kwame studied the old weights in museums and books, often having to rediscover the techniques themselves because the unbroken chain of apprenticeship was shattered by colonialism. They became archaeologists of their own culture, digging not in the earth, but in museum storage rooms and the memories of the few remaining elders who still remembered the stories. Their work is an act of reclamation, a way of saying, this is not a forgotten curiosity, this is our language, and we will speak it again. They are reweaving the severed thread, creating a new continuity where the colonial interlude becomes a painful comma, not a full stop. Kwame finishes the wax model and begins the process of building its clay investment mold, the same painstaking, layer-by-layer process you witnessed centuries ago. The materials might be slightly modernized, perhaps a commercially available refractory cement instead of the traditional clay and dung mix, but the principle is identical. The reverence for the process remains. When he fires the mold to melt out the wax, the sweet, ghostly scent that fills his modern studio is the same scent that filled the ancient workshop. It is the scent of tradition refusing to die. He will pour brass, not gold, but the metal is still a liquid sun, still a transformative force. The act of creation itself becomes the message. Some of these contemporary artists have begun experimenting with incorporating found objects from the modern world directly into their wax originals, casting them into the brass to create jarring, powerful juxtapositions. Imagine a traditional sword, an Athena, but with its blade replaced by the cast brass form of a spent bullet cartridge. Or a spider, a Nanzi, weaving a web that ensnares a tiny, perfectly cast computer circuit board. These works are provocative, challenging both the old traditions and the new realities, using the ancient language of the Goldweight to ask urgent, contemporary questions about power, conflict, and technology. They are proof that the tradition is not a static thing to be preserved, but a living, evolving conversation. The work of these artists is also educational. They run workshops for young people, teaching them not only the lost wax technique but the proverbs and philosophies behind the forms. They are building a new generation of Ghanaians who see these weights not as mysterious antiques, but as part of their living heritage, a source of pride and a wellspring of creativity. The Goldweight is being reborn, not as a tool of commerce, but as a tool of cultural identity and artistic expression. Its weight is no longer measured in gold dust, but in the gravity of its history and the power of its resurrected voice. As you watch Kwame pour the molten brass into the mold of his phone-wielding figure, you witness a bridge being built across time. The colonial shock, the silent museum years, they are not the end of the story. They are the dark forest through which the tradition had to wander before finding its way back to the light, transformed but unbroken. Historians still argue whether this modern artistic movement can truly be considered a direct continuation of the historical Goldweight tradition, or if it is a distinct, neo-traditional art form that simply uses the old iconography and techniques for entirely new purposes. Is it the same tree, putting out new leaves after a long winter, Or is it a new tree grown from a saved seed, similar but fundamentally different? As the metal cools and solidifies in Kwame's studio, taking on a new form for a new age, the answer seems to matter less than the simple, powerful fact that the fire has been lit once more. The final weight, whether it's the ancient snail from the goldsmith's bench or the modern, phone-wielding figure from Kwame's studio, rests in the center of your palm. You've followed its entire epic, from the dark, root-tangled earth to the fiery crucible, through the bustling market and the traumatic silence of the museum, all the way to its spirited, thoughtful rebirth. You've felt its density, decoded its symbols, and witnessed the collapse and renewal of its world. And now, at the end of this long, quiet tour, you are left with the fundamental, lingering question that has been whispering beneath the surface all along. What, in the end, are you actually holding? Is it, first and foremost, a unit of measure? Unquestionably. Its primary reason for being was to bring order and fairness to the chaotic, vital river of commerce. It was a physical law, a tiny legislator of value that allowed a kingdom to build its wealth on a foundation of trust. In your hand, you feel the ghost of countless transactions, the weight of agreements made and promises kept, the silent, steady pulse of an economy. It is a tool, an exquisite and sophisticated one, born from the practical necessity of turning the earth's most precious treasure into a manageable, divisible, and tradable commodity. This is its most straightforward, undeniable identity. But is that all? Can you look at the delicate spiral of the snail's shell, the powerful stance of the leopard, the elegant abstraction of the human form, and see only a tool? Of course not. It is equally, and perhaps more profoundly, a piece of sculpture. It is a miniature masterpiece of composition and form, a testament to an aesthetic sensibility that found beauty in balance, symbolism, and reduction. It is art for art's sake, even if that art was pressed into daily service. The care taken in the modeling of the wax, the skill required for a successful cast, the patience of the finishing, all speak to a deep, cultural drive to infuse even the most mundane objects with beauty. It is a piece of the forest, the village, and the human mind, frozen in metal. And then you remember the proverbs. The weight is also a book. A single, heavy word in a vast, visual library of wisdom. It is philosophy cast in brass, a concrete thought that you can hold and carry with you. It is a teacher, a reminder, a piece of advice from the ancestors, ensuring that every commercial exchange was also a moment of cultural reinforcement. It turns the marketplace into a classroom and the merchant into a sage. The leopard warns you of inherent nature, the spider teaches you cleverness, the hen reminds you of a mother's care. It is a vessel of language, a compact between the past and the present, ensuring that the core values of the community are never forgotten, only weighed and measured anew with each generation. It is a historical document, a tiny, durable archive. The forms it takes, the swords, the drums, the guns that appear in later casts, tell the story of the Ashanti people, their beliefs, their social structures, their encounters, and their struggles. It is a fossil of a way of life, a data point for understanding a civilization that left no written records of its own in the traditional sense. For historians, it is a priceless source, offering clues about trade, technology, and cultural values that would otherwise be lost to time. It is a messenger from a world that is gone, speaking to us across the centuries. Finally, in its modern incarnation, it is a symbol of resilience. It is a flag of cultural identity, raised again after a long and painful period of suppression. It is a declaration that the spirit of a people, their creativity and their wisdom, cannot be so easily extinguished. It is a seed that survived a long winter, now sprouting anew, different perhaps, but still carrying the essential genetic code of its origin. It is a promise to the future, a commitment to remember, to honor, and to continue the conversation that began deep in the forest, with gold in the earth and an idea in the mind of a sculptor. So, what are you holding? You are holding all of these things at once. You are holding a measure, a sculpture, a book, a document, and a symbol. You are holding a paradox made solid, an object that refuses to be confined to a single category. Its true weight is not just its mass in grams, but the cumulative gravity of its history, its art, its wisdom, and its enduring spirit. It is a small, heavy piece of a vast and brilliant human intelligence, a quiet, patient, and profoundly eloquent teacher whose lessons are far from over. And so, as our journey through the dense forests and bustling markets, past the fiery furnaces and into the quiet halls of memory, finally draws to a close, let the weight in your mind's hand settle, not as a problem to be solved, but as a companion to your thoughts. Feel the slow, patient unfurling of its story, a narrative woven not with loud declarations, but with the soft clink of brass and the whispered wisdom of proverbs. The anxieties of the modern world, the relentless pace, the digital noise, all of it can gently recede now, like a tide pulling back from a shore littered with the day's concerns. You have traversed centuries tonight, not as a frantic tourist, but as a quiet observer, and in doing so, you have carried a small, heavy piece of a different time, a different way of seeing, back with you into the comfort of your own room. There are no more questions to answer, no debates to be won, only the deep, resonant silence that follows a story well told, a silence that is itself a form of understanding. Let the images of liquid gold and patient carvers, of symbolic leopards and abstract figures, drift through your mind like slow-moving clouds, their edges softening, their colors deepening into the hues of dream. The world of the Goldweight has shared its secrets with you, and now, it asks for nothing in return but your rest. So release the weight, let it sink into the earth of your subconscious, and allow your own spirit to find its perfect, peaceful balance, cradled in the quiet certainty that some stories, like the best proverbs, are timeless, and some forms of beauty are heavy enough to anchor a soul. Sleep deeply, and dream in brass.